I refused my son $100,000. Days later, his wife's special coffee exposed the truth. When my son Daniel asked me for $100,000, I thought it was a joke. He had never been responsible with money, and this time he claimed it was for a business investment. But something in his eyes told me it wasn't about business at all. My instincts screamed to say no, and so I did. That single word, no, would ignite a storm I never saw coming. 2 days later, the tension in the house was palpable. Daniel's wife, Melissa, came over, unusually sweet, offering to make me coffee. We'd never been close, but I didn't think much of it. She served me a steaming cup, her smile fixed yet empty. Something about her movements seemed rehearsed, but I brushed it off, thinking I was being paranoid. I took a cautious sip. It tasted fine, maybe a bit bitter, but normal. As Melissa sat across from me, her gaze never left my face. Her eyes sparkled in a way that felt ... wrong. Then, Daniel walked in, pretending to be surprised I was there. Their exchange of glances was so quick, I almost missed it, but I caught enough to know they were hiding something. That night, I felt slightly dizzy and nauseous. I blamed it on fatigue, but deep down, I remembered Melissa's fixed stare as I drank. Something was off. The next morning, my neighbor, who happened to be a nurse, stopped by. She noticed my pale complexion and insisted on checking my blood pressure. It was alarmingly high. She urged me to get checked immediately. At the clinic, blood tests revealed traces of an unusual sedative. My heart froze. Who would try to drug me? The only food or drink I'd had at home was that coffee Melissa made. Suddenly, pieces started fitting together in a terrifying way. Had they tried to incapacitate me to get into my safe? Daniel knew exactly where I kept the cash and important documents. I decided not to confront them right away. Instead, I called my lawyer and told him everything. He advised me to set up hidden cameras in the house and record any suspicious activity. I agreed, my hands trembling as I placed the small devices in the kitchen, living room, and near the study where my safe was hidden behind a painting. 2 nights later, my plan worked. Daniel and Melissa came over to check on me. I pretended to be resting in my bedroom, leaving the living room light on. From my phone, I watched as they went straight to the study. Melissa whispered something, Daniel entered the code, and they pulled out documents and cash. My chest tightened. I had all the proof I needed. The next morning, I didn't say a word. Instead, I called the police and my lawyer. When the officers arrived, I showed them the footage. Their faces hardened. This was no misunderstanding, it was a calculated betrayal. They moved quickly, issuing warrants and taking statements. My lawyer reassured me we could ensure they'd face serious consequences. When Daniel was confronted, he crumbled. He claimed Melissa had pressured him into it, saying they were drowning in debt. Melissa denied everything, but the video showed her unlocking my safe with Daniel. Her smile from that coffee day flashed in my mind's mug. Sure, she'd win. Now, she sat in silence as the officers led her away. I wish I could say I felt victorious, but all I felt was grief. This was my son, the boy I had raised, the man I thought I knew. Betrayal by a stranger is painful, but betrayal by your own blood leaves a wound that never truly heals. I had saved my fortune, but at the cost of my family, and deep down, I knew nothing between us would ever be the same again. The house felt colder after that day. I walked past Daniel's childhood photos, wondering where I'd gone wrong. Every smile in those frames felt like a lie now. Friends called to check in, but I avoided most conversations. How could I explain that my son had tried to rob me and his wife had possibly tried to drug me? It sounded like a bad soap opera, but it was my reality. The police investigation moved quickly. Melissa's fingerprints were on the sedative container found in their apartment. Bank statements showed multiple large debts: gambling, high-end shopping, and unpaid loans. My lawyer said they had been desperate, but I couldn't summon sympathy. Desperation doesn't excuse betrayal, especially against someone who trusted you. Daniel called from the county jail. His voice cracked as he begged me to drop the charges. "Mom, I'm your son. You can't do this to me," he pleaded. I wanted to scream back, "You did this to yourself." But instead, I hung up without saying a word. My hands shook, not from anger, but from the sheer weight of disappointment crushing me. Late at night, I'd replay that morning of the coffee over and over. How many times had Melissa and Daniel planned this? How many rehearsed glances and whispers had gone unnoticed? I realized the betrayal wasn't a spur-of-the-moment decision, it had been brewing for months. That made the wound cut even deeper. I found an old letter Daniel had written me when he was 10, thanking me for always protecting him. Tears blurred my vision. The irony was unbearable. Now I had to protect myself from him. I tucked the letter away in a box, unsure if I'd ever be able to look at it again without feeling sick. In court, Melissa sat stiff eyes darting around, avoiding mine. Daniel kept his head down, looking more like a scared teenager than a grown man. The prosecutor played the footage, and I watched the jurors' expressions shift from curiosity to disbelief to disgust. The silence in the courtroom was deafening as their crime unfolded on the big screen. When the verdict came, Melissa was sentenced to 3 years for attempted theft and administering a harmful substance. Daniel received 2 years with eligibility for early release. My lawyer said it was a fair outcome, but fairness felt hollow. I didn't want vengeance, I wanted my son back. But the boy I knew was gone. After the trial, neighbors whispered when they saw me. Some offered pity. Others kept their distance, as if betrayal was contagious. I learned who my true friends were: those who didn't judge, who sat with me in silence when words failed. Their quiet presence became my lifeline. Months passed. I redecorated the house, trying to erase the shadows of that day. I sold the old safe and replaced it with a biometric one, not because I expected another robbery, but because I needed to feel secure again. Trust, once broken, doesn't just rebuild, it gets replaced by vigilance. One evening, I got a letter from Daniel. The handwriting was shaky, the tone apologetic. He claimed to have realized the gravity of his actions and asked for forgiveness. I stared at the words, feeling a strange mix of anger, sadness, and longing. Forgiveness is complicated. It's a gift you give for yourself, not for the other person. But I wasn't sure I was ready yet. I placed Daniel's letter in the same box as the one he'd written at age 10. The 2 pieces of paper felt like bookends to a life I no longer recognized. I couldn't bring myself to reply. Words were too small to bridge the canyon between us, and I refused to write anything out of pity. My silence would speak for itself, for now. Melissa never reached out. I later heard she filed for divorce while in prison. It didn't surprise me. Her loyalty had always been to her own gain. I wondered if Daniel realized he had burned his only safety net for someone who discarded him the moment she couldn't benefit from him anymore. That thought kept me up at night. One rainy afternoon, I drove past the park where Daniel used to play. I sat in the car watching kids laugh under the drizzle, their parents shouting for them to come inside. The scene was a cruel reminder that innocence doesn't vanish overnight. It's chipped away little by little until one day it's just gone. My therapist suggested writing unsent letters to Daniel. At first, it felt pointless. But slowly, the words became a releasing. Grief, confusion, all poured out. Some letters were filled with rage, others with memories of better times. It was like talking to the version of him I missed, the boy before Melissa, before greed. News of Daniel's parole hearing came sooner than expected. I wrestled with the decision of whether to attend. Part of me wanted to see him, to measure if there was true remorse in his eyes. Another part feared that seeing him would reopen wounds that had barely begun to heal. In the end, curiosity won. Walking into the parole board meeting, I felt every eye on me. Daniel looked older, thinner, but his gaze was steady. When it was his turn to speak, he admitted everything, every lie, every manipulation, every moment he'd chosen Melissa over me. He didn't beg this time. He simply said, "I understand if you can't forgive me." The board granted him early release. As he walked past me, we exchanged a brief nod. No hugs, no tears, just a silent acknowledgement that this was not a happy ending, but maybe a cautious new beginning. I left without looking back, unsure if I wanted him in my life again. Weeks later, Daniel showed up at my door. No warning, no phone call. He held out a small, wrapped box. Inside was a bracelet made from simple wooden beads. "I made it in prison," he said quietly. "It's not much, but it's honest work." For the first time in years, I saw a flicker of the boy I'd raised. We talked for hours, careful to avoid the deepest wounds. Trust wasn't rebuilt that day, but a seed was planted. He spoke about working at a mechanic's shop, paying off debts, staying away from old influences. I listened, torn between hope and self-protection. Hope is dangerous. It can heal or it can shatter. Before he left, Daniel asked if he could visit again. I hesitated, then agreed. As he walked away, the bracelet felt heavy on my wrist, not as a burden, but as a reminder. People can change, but the past remains etched in us like scars. The question wasn't whether I could forgive him, it was whether I could trust myself to try. Daniel began visiting once a month. At first, the conversations were surface-level work, the weather, the food he'd cooked. Gradually, he began opening up about the therapy he'd started. The nights he still woke up sweating from dreams about Melissa, the guilt that gnawed at him. I listened, weighing each word like currency. One evening, he told me about the first time he realized Melissa had been manipulating him. It was too late by then, he admitted. I'd already burned every bridge for her. The shame in his voice was raw, and for the first time, I didn't hear excuses. I only heard a man grappling with his own ruin. The bracelet he'd given me became part of my daily routine. I'd find myself absently rolling the beads between my fingers whenever I was lost in thought. It wasn't forgiveness yet, but it was a tetherous small thread tying us together, fragile but present. One cold morning, Daniel invited me to see the mechanic's shop where he worked. I expected a dim, greasy place, but instead found a bright, organized space filled with the smell of coffee and engine oil. His boss greeted me warmly, saying Daniel was one of his most reliable employees. Pride and disbelief twisted inside me. That night, I found myself digging through old photo albums. I stopped at one picture Daniel at 12, grinning with cake on his nose. For years, I couldn't look at those photos without feeling like they belonged to another lifetime. But now they felt like roots. And roots can still nourish something new. We decided to meet for lunch every other Sunday. The first few times were awkward, but eventually, we began laughing, again real laughter, not the forced kind we'd exchanged before. The distance between us started to shrink, though the shadow of the past still lingered at the edges. Then came the day Melissa was released. Daniel told me before she could contact him, "I'm not answering her calls," he said firmly. "I've got too much to lose now." His voice didn't shake, and for the first time, I truly believed him. That night, I slept easier than I had in years. Months passed, and our bond slowly mended. Not perfectly, not without scars, but it mended. Daniel apologized again one evening, unprompted. "You don't have to forgive me," he said, "but thank you for giving me a chance to prove I'm not that man anymore." My throat tightened. Maybe forgiveness wasn't a single moment, but 1,000 small ones. We started celebrating holidays together again. The first Christmas, Daniel gave me a photo frame with 2 pictures, one of him as a child and one of us at the mechanic's shop, both of us smiling. It was his way of saying the boy I remembered and the man he was becoming could coexist. Looking back, I realized the special coffee that had exposed them was the turning point. Not just in uncovering the truth, but in breaking the cycle. Pain had torn us apart, but truth, as bitter as it was, had planted the seeds of reconciliation. And sometimes, those seeds grow into something worth holding on to. By spring, our Sunday lunches had become a cherished routine. Sometimes we'd talk for hours. Sometimes we just sat in comfortable silence. There was no need to fill every gap with words. Presence itself was enough. It felt almost strange, this calm after so many storms. One afternoon, Daniel surprised me by introducing me to his mentor at the shop, an older man named Carl. Carl shook my hand and said, "Your son's got a good head on his shoulders. Hard worker, doesn't waste time complaining, just gets the job done." I couldn't remember the last time someone had spoken about Daniel that way. Later, Daniel told me he was saving money for night classes in automotive technology. "I want to own my own shop one day," he said, eyes bright with ambition. That spark, that quiet determination, was something I hadn't seen in years. It was the same light he'd had as a boy, tinkering with old radios in the garage. The day he brought his first restored car to show me, I almost cried. It gleamed in the sunlight, paint flawless, engine purring like a contented cat. "This is the first thing I've built entirely with my own two hands," he said. I could hear the pride in his voice, and it filled a space in me that had been empty for too long. Melissa, as far as I knew, had faded from the picture. There were rumors she'd moved out of state. Daniel didn't ask, didn't care. "She's part of a chapter I'm not rereading," he said. I believed him. The chains that once tied him to her seemed well and truly broken. We even began sharing small family traditions, again making my grandmother's old stew recipe. Taking weekend drives, laughing over inside jokes only we understood. These weren't grand gestures, but they built something sturdy between us, brick by brick. I realized one evening, as we sat on the porch sipping tea, that I wasn't holding my breath anymore. For years, I'd been waiting for the next betrayal, the next lie. But now, I trusted him, cautiously but genuinely. That trust was like a fragile glass sculpture, hard-won and worth protecting. Daniel noticed it too. "You don't look at me the same way anymore," he said quietly. "Not like you're waiting for me to mess up." I smiled and told him, "That's because you're not giving me a reason to." His eyes softened, and for a moment, we both knew we'd reached higher ground. When Daniel finally opened his own small repair shop a year later, I was there on opening day. The sign over the door read, "Rebuild Ottawa, fix what matters." I couldn't help but think how fitting it was. He had rebuilt not just cars, but himself and, in a way, our relationship to. As I stood there, watching him greet his first customers with an easy confidence, I felt an unfamiliar warmth, hope. The road we'd traveled had been long, messy, and painful, but we'd made it to a place where the past no longer defined us. And that, I realized, was the real victory. The first months of his shop were tough. Some days he'd come home exhausted, grease under his nails, shoulders slumped. But even then, there was no bitterness, only determination. "It's worth it," he'd say. And I believed him, because I could see it in the way his eyes lit up when a customer thanked him. One evening, I stopped by unexpectedly with dinner. I found Daniel under the hood of a beat-up pickup, sleeves rolled up, music humming from a dusty radio. He looked so alive in that moment, I almost didn't want to interrupt. But when he saw me, he grinned like a little boy. "You came," he said, as though it was the best part of his day. We sat on overturned crates in the corner, eating out of takeout containers. Between bites, he told me about a single mom who couldn't afford a repair bill, so he'd done the work for free. "She cried," he said softly, "and I get it now. It's not just about fixing things, it's about helping people get back on the road." It struck me then, the boy who had once been wrapped up in greed and manipulation had grown into a man with integrity. He'd learned the value of work, kindness, and dignity not from my lectures, but from living through his own mistakes. Months later, I found myself at the shop again, but this time not for dinner. Daniel had invited me for an anniversary celebration 1 year since opening. The place was filled with friends, customers, even Carl from the old garage. A banner read, "1 year strong, here's to the road ahead." Daniel raised a toast. "2 second chances," he said, looking right at me. "For the roads we've taken, the ones we've left behind, and the ones we're building together." My throat tightened, but I lifted my glass high. It wasn't just his victory, it was ours. After the crowd dispersed, we sat outside under the neon glow of his shop sign. He said, I used to think you were just being stubborn when you said no about the money. But you were protecting me from myself. I nodded, not needing to say more. He already understood. We both knew the past couldn't be erased, but it no longer weighed on us like it used to. It had shaped us, tested us, and strangely bonded us in a way nothing else could. Forgiveness wasn't a single act. It was a road we chose to walk every day. As I got into my car that night, Daniel called out, "Hey, Mom." I turned, and he smiled. "Thanks for not giving up on me." It was simple, but it meant more than any grand gesture. I drove home with the windows down, letting the cool air wash over me, feeling lighter than I had in years. Sometimes, the hardest gift to give is not money, but faith that someone you love can rebuild, even from the wreckage. Daniel had proved me right, and as I looked up at the stars that night, I realized the road ahead was wide open, and we were both finally free to drive it.